Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to have a special day today. We're going to talk a little about Wheaton College and a friend here that we brought along on this August 12th, 2020. We're going to have a special guest here. I'm going to bring him up here and bring it up. Okay, he's coming up now. Here he comes. Dr. Vincent Bacote. And he's professor at Wheaton College there. What areas are you professor of, Doctor? I forgot. I didn't write that down well.
I teach theology and I direct our Center for Applied Christian Ethics.
Oh, a little theology, then action with the theology. We do something with it.
Well, it all ought to, the ethics ought to always be connected to it. But
yeah, that's very good. That's very good. Dr. Vincent, you want to give us a little bit about your, I'm so happy you're with us. So I just welcome you to be with us. And can you just give a little background maybe of how you got over to Wheaton and other things along that line, and then we'll move on?
Sure. I wound up at Wheaton because my first year as a doctoral student, I was a participant in the Wheaton Theology Conference. Okay. And my presentation was, I guess, appreciated by the faculty member, Dennis Ockholm, who's retiring from Azusa Pacific now, but he was here then at the time. He was here for a long time. And he was one of the people that was the founders of the Wheaton Theology Conference. And he would tell people that the theology conference is how we got Vince, is what he would say. So that basically created the trajectory towards me starting at Wheaton in January of 2000 with one chapter of my dissertation completed. And so the first 2 summers I was here, I finished my dissertation and then defended that in September of 2001.
2002,
sorry. Yeah. So, 2001. Yeah. And then graduated in June of 2002. So I'm in my 21st year at Wheaton College.
Wow.
Which makes me a veteran, I suppose. It's weird to be the veteran, but apparently that's what I am. So I became the director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics in 2007. If you had told me when I started at Wheaton that I was going to be director of the Center for Applied Christian Ethics, I would have said, I don't think so. But my former department chair came in my office one day and told me that my predecessor was going to another institution and that meant the directorship was open and he thought that I should be the director. So I was basically sort of given that nudge. And so I've been the director ever since. I'm very glad to be the director now. I'm thankful for that nudge. And for me, it's a way to have a context for a lived theology. That's one of the ways I think about what Christian ethics is. How Christians have moral discernment, which is how Christians ought to be living out their lives. Ideally, Christians are living out their lives out of what they believe as Christians. So hence Christian ethics. So I've been doing that since 2007. As you might imagine, it's going to be a different year for the Center for Applied Christian Ethics because usually we bring people from off campus.
Right.
That's a more complicated state of affairs right now.
So now it's Zoom or something else?
Well, we're still trying to figure out, is there like some special dispensation to, bring somebody like in a limo and then they go through one door into an auditorium, they talk. I from a socially distanced, location, interview them, and then they walk off. So otherwise we have to create some kind of probably remote thing and then invite people to it. But we'll see what happens. I mean, every institution is trying to figure out how to do education, to do it well, to try to do it in a way that you attend to the fact that if you were remote, everybody doesn't have the same kind of circumstances to access education well, because it could be several people are using all that bandwidth, or they don't even have the service, or there's so many people in the house, it's just hard to be conducive to do your work well. So hopefully people are going to be able to be here for the whole
Okay.
semester. It's a different structure to the semester because all students, if it goes according to plan, will leave the Friday before Thanksgiving. Be gone for that
What
week.
about Thanksgiving? What was that about Thanksgiving?
They'll leave the Friday before Thanksgiving for the semester.
Oh, I see.
And then they'll have one final week of class that'll be remote for everyone the week after Thanksgiving. And then the week after that will be final exams.
So they're coming in. That's a good point where you got here. They're going to be coming back sort of the college and the dorms and all that, or how is that?
Yeah. It'll be very different how they're doing it, but yes. But students who, for varying reasons, choose to or have to be remote, they will be all their instruction will be through the computer.
So you're going to have, well, there's a lot of technology working here, and there's going to be a lot of work for the communications department or whatever you want.
Well, everybody's been training how to do this teaching when you have some people in the room with you and some people across the digital veil. So that's what we're dealing with.
I don't know if you know my other Vincent friend, Dr. Vincent Gaddis at Benedictine.
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. That's another Vincent.
But
I had him, but he was debating how he was going to do the classes too, how they were going to do it at Benedictine.
Yeah. Well, it's all it keeps shifting all the time.
Yeah, we want it safe for everybody, and you too, and your family and everybody. So that's the big thing. And I want to say, I heard you about that doctorate program that you had there. I got through the easy way at Wheaton grad school. I only got an MA, and I don't think I had to write a paper either. I forgot what I had to do. For Christian ed, that was a different, there was a different criteria. Or you could do, I think you could do what you want. It looks better on your resume or whatever. But so I have an MA, but we won't talk about how we got it. But anyway, now everybody knows. Okay. But yeah, so I don't think I had to defend. I don't remember about it too much, but it was so long. It was when you were a younger guy. I'm an old guy here, so that was in the 70s.
I remember the 70s.
Huh?
I remember the 70s.
Oh, but you were a young one, though. You were young. You were just being born, probably. You were just birthed.
No, I was born in 1965.
Okay, you got 5 more. Okay, you got, but still, that's pretty. You were 10 then when I was. Yeah. But I met you at Warehouse Church several years ago.
Yep.
And that's how I remember meeting you, and I've seen other things you've been doing. And you had a book that you were talking about, which was really interesting to me. And I've always, people know about me, I'm always interested in theology and Christianity and how it mixes in the world. And what you were talking about, your applied ethics and other things along that line. So we have this book that you put out, and it's not that old, actually. It's 5 years old only, and that's not too bad. And the topic's still relevant about theology and politics. And I'm going to give you, I told Dr. Vincent I was there, and I read the book, and I got a lot of stuff like this. It's here somewhere, but in my studio, in my home here. No. But here's some of the chapters that we have in that book. You have about permission, perspective, posture, and perseverance, on politics and theology. You want to just give us a little basis for your book and just how it's still relevant for us?
Well, the book, hence the title, Political Disciple, is about, can discipleship and politics mix, really? Which is why the first chapter is about permission, hence the subtitle, Can We Go Out in Public? Because depending upon the tradition you come from, some people are very resistant to the idea of Christians being involved in politics because they think it's too
Right.
worldly. So that chapter is about how the doctrine of creation really is a doctrine that orients us towards always being in the game of politics, really. So that's the emphasis there, that God gives us permission. In other words, because I think a lot of Christians feel like they don't have permission. That they have permission to go to church, but they're given a prohibition from going into public engagement. So hence permission. Doctrine of creation does that. Perspective is about really how do we think about ourselves in relationship to the public, and what is our primary allegiance, and out of that allegiance, what does that mean for the perspective you're going to have about political engagement. And so I focus on our doctrine about Jesus, our Christology there. And if you have a ultimate loyalty to Jesus and he's central to your identity, he's central to your commitments, then what does it mean for him to really be number one? And for you to perhaps to participate in politics, but not make party affiliation or other markers of identity the thing that is actually sort of calling the shots. So,
Right.
if Jesus calls you the shots, it ought to be giving you perspective on politics. Posture is really about the doctrine of sanctification, hence pursuing public holiness. And the emphasis there is to say that the sanctified person is the person, or the person who's in the process of sanctification, is a person who's becoming more and more human. And what does it mean if we're becoming more and more human and trying to be more humanized and to regard others in ways where we want to humanize them rather than demonize them? So the goal is really trying to live more human, and in doing that, to be people that I would say are more attractive in the way that we engage public life, because our goal is not to be trying to create enemies, but trying to find ways to show how humans really ought to live. Perseverance is eschatology, the end of the story. And if you believe that God is in control of history, what does that mean when you have to contend with the fact that if you're involved in political life is not some 45-degree incline of everything getting better and better. It's full of twists and turns, peaks and valleys, disappointments, surprises, etc. And when you're dealing with the distress of political engagement, of the inertia when things aren't going anywhere, why stay in the game? Well, you stay in the game because we're people of hope, and but people of hope who also are people of lament, so that we don't deny when bad things happen. We don't deny that people may have challenges to really deal with, and that they're really legitimate ones. So that's the whole point. And the whole idea about the postscript is just emphasizing that one of the things I'm saying in the book is that what you believe as a Christian matters for how you live your life in every dimension of life. So hence certainly public life, and hence political life. So I just sort of reflect a little bit more on why our beliefs matter, or ought to, for the way that we go about public engagement.
Yeah, and it brings me to my first point to a little beyond discussion here. I wanted to bring up was I've been involved with I'm white, so I'm a white evangelical. Now, this, when I wrote this up on the screen here, I was just thinking about the new preference here on identity. The newspapers, and maybe you've noticed that, Dr. Vincent, that they've said that the B on black, when we talk about it, I guess in this way, should always be capitalized. And then the question is about white. Right now, it's not actually said it should be capitalized, but I did because anyway, I just wrote it here. But but my point being is I work and I'm in a connection with the African American church and a clergy group.
Mm-hmm.
And I know there's a difference between black and white theology and what you just outlined, that some would think about activism. And I know John Lewis would be an example of activism in the black community.
Mm-hmm.
How how do you bridge that at Wheaton College? Wheaton College is sort of like, I guess we call it basically white, but I don't want to. It
That would
should
be a
be
fair
more.
assessment.
We'll talk more about the background of the
Yeah,
school, but
yeah,
I just want to touch base on that because I
yeah,
think the
yeah.
activism part plays a big difference here.
Mhm.
I have a lot of evangelical white friends. They won't touch some of these issues. Won't even talk about the word justice is a bad word and all
Sure,
this
sure,
type of stuff.
sure,
So maybe give a little perspective on black white
sure,
evangelical.
sure. Well, on the one hand, if you talk about what the markers of evangelicalism are, going with the what people call the classic David Bevington four markers:
Right,
ultimate trust in the Bible, an emphasis that when people need to have a saving conversion experience, an
right,
emphasis on the fact that Christ's cross is central for your belief in salvation, and that you have a mission orientation. Hence, that is the activism. That's not a black or white thing. You go to your,
right,
you know, quote unquote typical black church. I mean, there's a call to, discipleship at the end of every service.
right,
There's some kind of emphasis on the needs of the immediate congregation, as well as often attention to the life of the community. Um, and certainly, and actually, within a lot of black churches, there's no question about whether you completely trust the Bible, right? So you have those things.
right,
In what in that breadth of white evangelicalism, and same thing with black churches, I would say, you have people have common beliefs, but there are differences about baptism, differences about church government, differences about, um, to some degree, how much you think people ought to be involved in public life, etc. But the common denominator for evangelicals is sort of those common commitments. It's a point of intersection for people that are very different in other ways. That's one of the reasons why I think the word evangelical is a word that talks about unity, but also difference is very central to the identity. So it's not always as easy of a thing to capture as uh, current conversations would suggest. You have to deal with the diversity because a Presbyterian is not a Baptist, is not a Lutheran, is not a Methodist, is not a certain kind of non-denominational, charismatic, etc. There are a lot of differences, even if they share core beliefs, and that's really across, I would say, ethnic identity. The difference is on one that the divide around race historically has meant that you've had different, essentially like different, you know universes in a way, right? Uh, and so you have your domain of sort of historically black churches, and you have the way that you got these conservative Protestant churches that emerged out of mainline Protestantism that had those commitments. And one of the things that white evangelicalism, did not do very well, which is why Carl F. H. Henry wrote one of the reasons why Carl F. H. Henry wrote The Uneasy Conscience of Modern Fundamentalism in 1947, is because they were committed to these truths, but withdrawn from public engagements. And part of that public engagement included attending to questions of race.
right.
And even though Henry wrote that book, as historians have told me, the book is influential. I mean, the book is noticeable or significant because Henry wrote it, not because Henry's message was persuasive. So that he was trying to call people to a more engaged faith, and it took a while before that really happened. Um, so I think what was tended to happen with white evangelicalism is white evangelicalism had a dissonant relationship with public engagement, with politics and culture, arguably into the 90s.
Right.
Even though you begin to get attention to abortion and other things in the
The only
70s,
one, doctor, would be when the Jerry Falwell movement of
moral majority,
moral majority,
yeah,
but that's another story. But I mean, it's
or even Pat
related. But
Robertson running for president,
right, it's related. Go on.
yeah,
I
yeah,
sorry to interrupt.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But like when I went to seminary at Trinity in the 1990s, there was still this, well, does is social action part of mission and all this other stuff. By the late 90s,
Yeah.
lots of white evangelicals were saying, We ought to be involved in politics. We ought to be involved in cultural engagement. They were very instrumental in why George W. Bush got elected. And it's been a mixed bag since, because I think even though you've had more people get politically involved, people aren't sure about, was this the right thing to do? What kind of bargain was this? And honestly, I think for many of them, uh, the engagement with politics is really a crisis management approach to politics, where if everything's okay, you don't really, vote, etc., but you don't
Oh,
think
I
that
see.
much
It's
about
it's
it.
only a short-term thing, or
Or
it's not part of your thinking. It's just this issue, and we just go that way is more or less an issue
well,
oriented.
you could put it that way. I mean, if there is a crisis, then I need to pay attention to it.
Right,
If there's not a crisis, then it's kind of business as usual, right?
right,
Um, the African American church emerges out of, you get emancipation, and then
right,
you're just kind of like holding, you got to survive, right? And the black churches are these denominations where you did everything. It was the central,
right,
institution of the community, which is
right,
why you had, if you look at a lot of the African American political figures, especially if you're thinking about 50s, 60s, 70s, into the 80s, a lot of them had reverend in front of their name. Why? Well, because the pastor was like the community leader
right,
or the person involved in community engagement. So you, even though you have African American traditions where people argue about how much political involvement should be involved, how much should you talk about politics in church,
right,
still a common backdrop was, it was still the context where people had to talk about how they were navigating their life outside the walls of the church.
right,
So as an institution, it didn't have the luxury, you might say, to not be involved politically. That's a very different thing than choosing whether to be involved. Because some people would argue that with white
yeah. Well,
evangelicalism,
some would argue about the white church. I read a book by Pastor Swanson in Chicago. But his argument in that book was basically the non-engagement is part of racism too.
David Swanson's book,
Yeah,
the White Church, yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
I think that was part of his argument too, maybe.
Well, I
Uh,
think I think there's a book called White Too Long that Robert P. Jones has written, and part of what he argues is that whether it's mainline Christians, Catholics, or Protestants, that white Christians generally kept in place the racial order,
right,
uh, because as the racial order was moving forward in the formation of the United States, and you had,
right,
a lot of people that were religious. Well, a lot of those people, not all of them, but a lot of them included a version of the faith that kept
right,
the
right,
segregation in place. So
right,
you kind of weave into the DNA, or gene splice it, however you want to say, that you have this commitment to racial segregation.
right,
And of course, you get debates within those denominations at certain points later on about how people are navigating slavery, how they're navigating integration, but it's basically um, a part of the history that, at the very least, is something that drags behind you like an anchor, and the anchor has not yet been cut off, right? So, and part of it's just because, I mean, it's just the weight of history. If I do anything for decades or a couple of centuries, apart from an incredible revival that undoes many things and introduces new things, then the baggage from what's behind me is still going to come along with me in at least a residual manner. In
yeah,
other ways, it'll just kind of keep showing up, like a person that, grew up in a certain home where people always did certain things, and they move away and they live somewhere else and they want to have a different kind of life, but they keep discovering that these things start happening in the way that they operate. Well, why? Well, because that's the way you grew up,
yeah,
and you have these reflexive realities within you that, if you haven't worked to actually work against them or to undo them, they just kind of operate. So I think that's part of the dynamic that continues to happen with white evangelicals. I think, what I would call basic white evangelical, whatever that is, because there is so much diversity in where they're coming from.
Doctor, I just want to say this term evangelical, usually when they do polling and other stuff, does not include the black evangelical.
Yes.
So it skews the whole thing about how they view stuff. I mean, when they do polling, it's basically the white evangelical they're looking at, not the, for some reason, that's not good either. I don't think that's a good way. I mean, to call evangelical and then it makes the black not evangelical. I mean, it's just horrible term.
Well, part of it is the label evangelical was used by people in these predominantly white organizations.
Right, there was,
and so it's the description of what those people are fits what traditional black churches would believe.
But they never use that terminology. I understand that, but still, it gets them like there's some.
Yes, I understand.
You know what I'm saying? It looks like they're. And
well,
you say that about Catholics too. Sometimes we don't think they're evangelical. There's a lot of evangelical Catholics. I mean, the Catholic Church has got a little evangelicalism in it too, but we don't want to admit that.
Well,
but
that's Bevington would say, David Bevington, the historian, would say that yes, you can include Catholics in terms of the definition of evangelical. Not all people who are historians of evangelicalism will say that, but Bevington actually will say that there are some he thinks fit the description.
Well, I've seen a lot of it lately, so and I know it's in the past too. And some of it led to the one doctrine that's probably not good in the long term here. I mean, the doctrine of discovery, and that was part of that when they were reaching out in the early the 1400s or 1500s. Yeah.
Well, I think with any tradition, if you look long enough, look back far enough, there are lots of things
a lot of warts.
There's no pristine tradition anywhere in any people, any country. No. So I think which doesn't mean therefore just dismiss those things, but it means that we have to pay attention to those things and then think about how we relate to our history as we go forward in the present. I think one of the things also about the white evangelical label, a lot of the polling hasn't just been polling white churchgoers. I mean, it's been polling people who call themselves an evangelical but who don't even go to church.
Right. No, it's a slippage there in that.
So you have a lot of that complicates it. But I will say that, when people are talking about the 81%, et cetera, other polling of people that are white churchgoers that are evangelical, and not just them, by the way, some Catholics, even some mainline people, there are surprising numbers of people that were in favor of the current president. And I think it's in part a challenging thing to deal with because on the one hand, it wasn't like you had two candidates that were very similar. You had two very different candidates. And as it happened in 2016, most conservative white evangelicals, going back to the Clinton administration, had already been told that Hillary Clinton was the enemy. So only some kind of
some baggage there.
Only some kind of like angelic visitation would have led to anybody like voting.
No, I understand that.
So I think that's part of it. But I do think there's a lot of this conversation about whether a lot of white evangelicals are supportive of the current administration because they have access to power. And what I would say is, well, obviously some people, right. But that's in but find me a tradition where you don't have those people.
Yeah.
Because which leaders, because it's not like every major evangelical leader is in these pictures with Trump in the White House.
No. It's a certain, right? It's a certain crowd.
Yeah. And I think, and I think, there has to be attention to, yes, you need to give attention to the fact that there are people who are happy about access to power, happy about access to influence, and they're like, look, I would say they encounter the apprentice version of Donald Trump, who's kind of, he's boorish, but he's nicer than I thought he was, and he said he'd do stuff for us. So my sense is that's who people are encountering, and they're like, he's really not as bad as you think he is, because I've had conversations with him. Because Apprentice Donald Trump is not as off-putting as Art of the Deal Donald Trump, right? Art of the Deal Donald Trump, you're like, this guy is so arrogant, and it's like, dude, the room isn't big enough for your head, okay? I mean, that's the I'll never forget a 60 Minutes interview where they were talking about the Art of the Deal and Trump, and Merv Griffin was interviewed as well, and they were interviewing Merv Griffin because Donald Trump talked about how he had taken Merv Griffin for a ride in some real estate transaction, etc. Merv Griffin talking about how it didn't happen. Point is that the Donald Trump in that interview was a person who somehow had built this public reputation, but was known for being boorish and arrogant.
Right. Well, this is
and a womanizer and all the other kind of stuff.
Okay.
Apprentice Donald Trump is like, oh, other people on the show are the villain. He's the guy with the business sense. He's actually pretty nice to people, it seems. He's not as bad as I thought he was. I mean, the show was a success.
Well, that's
so my point is that I think it's important to be aware that I think when people are looking at 45, what version of 45 are they looking at, right?
Well, we're looking at it right now, but I get what you're saying. That
version of 45 is also something
it might be the TV version too. I just we're doing things so fast here. I mean, talking so good, but we better move on.
Sure.
Well, we'll finish up here soon, but I think we've had a good discussion here. I just want to get your thoughts about the Black Lives Movement and the Christians' response. I've had friends in Chicago who go to that church here, that Swanson's church. That they marched the other day when they had marches, and I know their churches have too. Joined Dr. Meeks and others. Not Dr.
James
Pastor Meeks. In Chicago, and had some good marches. And then there's the bad side of the riots, but that's I don't know where those came from. Just an evil intent, I think, on some people's part. But there's been a lot of good things here happening too.
It's like, does everybody that opposes abortion want to blow up abortion clinics?
Right. No, it's the same story. Right.
Yeah, exactly. When it comes to Black Lives Matter as a movement, the one thing people don't understand is that when it was emerging post Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, etc., the part of their strategy was to be decentralized, to not be the NAACP.
Oh, okay.
To do things differently, right? And to have a more disruptive type of strategy in terms of public events, etc. But it's decentralized. Because it is decentralized, it depends upon what chapter you go to.
Yeah, different places. Different.
So you can't just say because you went to the website and you read what the state.
Okay, that's the official side. Then there's just Black Lives Matter that we're using that, and people are just catching that phrase, not necessarily with any organization per se.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. But I think even people that are wearing T-shirts and they're organization people, the organization people aren't all trumpeting all those values, or might not even necessarily agree with all of those.
Right.
So I think, and the other thing is, though, I think when people are talking about, well, I went to the website and I saw this stuff and I was upset about it. What I'd ask those people to do is, I was going, well, have you heard the people who are the founders of it talk about those things specifically, what they mean by those statements? Because there's a statement about the family there, right? Now, is that about blowing up the nuclear family, or is that about the fact that if you only focus on the nuclear family, you don't talk about how the community plays a role in helping support families, and you want to give attention to supporting families?
Right.
Now, and my point is that there's probably a variety of views on what that is, and there are probably a variety of agendas support that are connected with that particular phrase. But I think with anything, people need to ask, all right, well, if there's something that the movement is doing that's positive, am I willing to admit the positives, even if I critique other things?
Right.
In other words, am I capable of doing the act of discernment to say that's good. That's not so good. I'm not so sure about that. That's okay. I really like that. Really don't
Well,
like that.
that approach has to be done in politics all the time. I mean,
It
we
should
only
be
got
done.
two parties.
Well,
There's bad and
yeah,
I
well,
identify more with one party, but
yeah,
there's bad in every party, or there's something you don't agree with, or
yeah,
that person just not good, or
yeah,
I mean, it happens and actually happens in church life too. We know that, and the church has had problems and works on it, and sometimes they don't work on
yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. Well,
anyway, uh-huh.
can I say one more thing to that? I think a Christian view of Black Lives Matter should be this: one, am I willing to tell the whole truth about things?
Right,
And if I'm willing to tell the whole truth, how much do I really know about the Black Lives Matter movement anyway? Not what somebody told me, but do I actually know what they say
right,
about themselves? And am I willing to say, I understand this point, I understand that concern, I understand that motivation. I'm willing to do that. Or do I just want it to have a simplistic understanding of it so I can just kind of have a neat summary of it? I stick it in my pocket and I can dismiss it and pull that summary out to dismiss it. When I would never want somebody to do that to me. Right? I mean, tell the truth about people. Okay.
right.
And I say that as a person who has concerns because of the way that I regard faith in public life. But I think people need to be willing to actually be truthful about all that is there rather than what they think is there because of how they assume that certain phrases or vocabulary must mean certain things. So I don't think so. There needs to be more care in dealing with that. And when it comes to the phrase Black Lives Matter, so I think most people who use the phrase don't even know what the organization stands for. What they care about is they're saying this is how you say all lives matter, specifically African American lives.
Right.
And I think other people they're afraid to say it because depending upon what ideological
Right.
echo chamber you're in,
It
there's
goes
some
from
things
the
you can say.
organization to the concept. The word is so broad,
Yeah,
Black
yeah,
Lives Matter. Is it the
yeah,
organization, or is this the concept, or
yeah,
and I never really thought too much about the organization. I always thought the
yeah,
statement was a valid statement, and it's still a valid statement. And I think your about truth is very important. It's one of the biggest things out there in the last years here, or last 3.5 years, that we have to look at, and being with ethics too. That is probably the biggest question out. What is truth? And that was always talked about. And I just want to go one. We'll do this very quickly. Uh, I just wanted to touch base about Jonathan Blanchard 1 second. A few seconds here, not too long, because it's we've
yeah,
prolonged this longer than I thought, but we're having a good time here too. This is a book that came out in the 80s. Well, actually, it's from 59. It came out in 82 again, and I've just looked at it briefly. It's very small print, but that's how
mhm,
they did it. It's got a lot of it's got a good index though. The book has an index, and I found out some things that I didn't know about Blanchard. And at the college, Wheaton College, it was earlier called the Illinois Institute, I believe that was the
yes,
name,
correct.
and that came from here's the beauty. Here's the thing that I like. It's just my perspective here on this. But Blanchard was an abolitionist, and that I think hasn't been brought up enough about Wheaton College and in the current environment. I think that's a very important thing. And well, anyway, the college got that Illinois Institute started from Batavia, my hometown. They had a meeting here of Wesley Methodists. Now, I had to look a little more about that up, but that's how it started. And I think it was 1852 or something, 40, I forgot, but it was earlier. And then Blanchard took it over in the 60, I believe, or 61. They took it over and changed the whole thing and brought it around. But the early buildings there had also, in the book says, Batavia limestone. So I got it's another feature there.
So what you're
And,
really saying is that it should be Batavia College.
yeah, it should be Batavia or something. I don't know. I just felt good about it. I don't know why. But I got to read more of it. And I encourage we should be talking about it. I don't know how much talk there is at Wheaton about Blanchard, but I think there should be probably more yet, you know?
Well, there is, you know, when students come to the college or when people are getting tours of the college, they do mention Jonathan Blanchard. They do mention that he was an abolitionist. They mention, you know, we have this obelisk in Blanchard Hall because of us being a stop on the Underground Railroad, that kind of stuff. So that gets mentioned, but I think sometimes whenever people think that Wheaton is, you know, a haven of, you know, center right or right views of things,
Oh,
you know, somebody else will say, it depends on who you talk to. You know, some people think we're a bunch of, you know, right wing people. Other people think we're a bunch of leftists. Okay, so you know, I think this is what happens at academic institutions. But I think that sometimes people will say, "Oh, Wheaton College, wasn't Jonathan Blanchard your founder? Don't you want to do things in the spirit of Jonathan Blanchard?" So in fact, actually, at the Wheaton Theology Conference, when I, you know, the event that is the reason I'm here, the first event that evening, that lecture, Eugene Rivers talked about the fact that Wheaton College should be sort of more in the spirit of Jonathan Blanchard. So yeah, I'll never forget it.
well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, that just sort of hit me, Blanchard, and a lot of things happening lately about history and monuments and Civil War and all that stuff. And I just thought about Wheaton College had that, and I think it was Underground Railroad even through Wheaton, maybe, right?
Yes, and there is in Blanchard Hall. You go up to the second floor. There's a bus. It's flat. Charles Blanchard, Jonathan Blanchard, and Charles Blanchard.
That's the son, I guess, right?
Charles? Yeah, the first two presidents. So there's in Blanchard Hall. There's these sort of relief things of him that are in brass, I think.
And then I read about the first African American graduate. It was a sad story. He did well, and then all of a sudden his mental state went bad and didn't do good at the end. It was a sad story. I was wondering about that period and being the first black student.
Well, that's a tough period, no matter who you are. If you're
right,
African American.
Right. So I just thought, well, he had some good things helping him, but still, it was pretty tough. So it finally got it's a sad story on that part. But anyway, I just thank you here for coming by, and I'm just going to give one or a couple just quick pass by things here real fast.
All right.
Just come with me on Friday at 5, and we'll hear some more. I got a guest. I got maybe one or two. I got a mystery guest to work. But we're going to have a guest. We really are. Not no reruns. We've had reruns, Doctor, sometimes when things don't work out. But you're a good rerun. We'll have reruns.
Thank you.
But then the other thing, couple other things real quick here. I don't know college students get into this, but everybody should be getting in about that census, following that. I had some census people on a few weeks ago, and that was a big thing to get that going. And Aurora had about 70%, maybe 80% in Wheaton now, participation, I should say. So that's coming up. Otherwise, they're going to be at your door.
Yes, they're I guess getting in the vans.
They're real close to getting at the door. I heard it's about now, so you better get that in real soon. And the other thing is, one other thing real fast here. If I can get this thing to work here now, come on. Just remember the VNA testing, and you can get that in Aurora, just so you don't have to wait in the car. And they got appointment testing, and the costs are low. If not, that's free. So that's the number 630-892-4355. And I have a flyer online. You can see that at the XPian and news that news website. So that's some of the stuff that's happening here. And I just thank Dr. Vincent Bacote to to be with us, Dr. Vincent Bacote. Thank you very much for your time and your energy, and I just appreciated it very much. And we had a good conversation. It's a little lengthy, but we had a good conversation. I think everybody will appreciate it.
It's what happens, I guess.
Yeah, we don't have any commercial breaks. We don't. Anyway, it was a very good time together. So, Dr. Vincent, I just thank you again for taking time to do this, and we'll have it up on our website, and so that's going to be happening too. And that's it. So be sure to check that out. We have several of our past ones at our website. So that's it for today. So I just want to say God bless, bye-bye, and thank you, Dr. Vincent, again. Bye-bye, everybody. Bye-bye now.
Bye.